And your inventory is water. I grew up surrounded by water. I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe. I grew up surrounded by the universe.
He's come to check on our progress.
I grew up surrounded by
Progress.
I hit the ship, but they used a decoy.
I grew up surrounded by
Decoy.
Your clones are very impressive. You must be very proud.
I grew up surrounded by
Clones?
Always a pleasure to meet a Jedi. I grew up surrounded by pleasure. Boba, Ruded Sohib. I grew up surrounded by Ruded Sohib. There can be no mistakes this time. I grew up surrounded by mistakes. Pack your things. We're leaving. I grew up surrounded by things. Hang on, son. We'll move into the asteroid field. I grew up surrounded by the asteroid field. And we'll have a couple of surprises for him. I grew up surrounded by surprises. I was recruited by a man called Tyrannus on one of the moons of Bogdan. I grew up surrounded by moons. Do you like your army? I grew up surrounded by army.
I was beginning to wonder if you'd got my message.
I grew up surrounded by
Message.
I look forward to seeing them in action.
I grew up surrounded by
Action.
Contact your troops. Tell them to move to the higher levels.
I grew up surrounded by
Troops.
Execute Order 66.
I grew up surrounded by
Order 66.
Thank you, Cody. Now let's get a move on. We've got a battle to win here.
I grew up surrounded by
Battle.
Then we decided to come and rescue you.
Good job.
I grew up surrounded by
Good job.
Obi-Wan told me terrible things.
I grew up surrounded by
Terrible things.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
I grew up surrounded by
Too many of them.
That you killed younglings.
I grew up surrounded by
Younglings.
Love won't save you, Padme. Only my new powers can do that.
I grew up surrounded by
Love.
My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
I grew up surrounded by
Democracy!
For reasons we can't explain, we are losing her.
I grew up surrounded by
For reasons
Your anger and your lust for power have already done that.
I grew up surrounded by
Lust.
I see through the lies of the Jedi.
I grew up surrounded by
Lies.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil!
I grew up surrounded by
Evil!
It seems in your anger, you killed her.
I grew up surrounded by
Anger.
we need to operate quickly if we are to save the babies.
I grew up surrounded by
Babies.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
I grew up surrounded by
High ground! Bring balance to the Force! Not leave it in darkness!
I grew up surrounded by
Darkness!
and we'll have a couple of surprises for him. I grew up surrounded by I grew up surrounded by
Watch out!